Hello geographers, and welcome to another lesson from the Changing China unit. In this lesson we're going to be asking this question: where does everyone live in China? And we will effectively be exploring how the physical geography of China influences where everybody lives. So this lesson forms the second lesson in the Changing China unit, and you can see it's here on the learning journey. So hopefully you've got yourselves a pen and some paper to write on. And if you'd like to write today's title, Where Does Everyone Live in China, onto your piece of paper, and today's date, and underline both with a ruler. Then what I'd like you to do is put the numbers 1 through to 10 in the margin. And what you're going to simply do is to read each of the following 10 statements. And next to each number, all you're going to do is you're going to write down if the statement is true, or do you think it might be false? Okay, so read it carefully before making that decision and then write down your answer. Okay, pause the video and have a go now. So hopefully you've had a go at that activity and you've decided whether the statements are true or false. And now we're going to go through them. So you might like to see if you've got a different colour pen so that you can mark them as you're going along. So starting with number 1. Statement number 1 is actually false. The largest country in the world is actually Russia, and then it's Canada, and then China, according to area of the country. Number 2 is true. Half of the world's cement is used in China each year. So there is a huge amount of construction going on in the country. Number 3 is also true. Around about 60% of Chinese people live in towns and cities. And that figure is probably set to increase very rapidly. Number 4 is actually false. There are not a variety of political parties in China. There is only the Chinese Communist Party. Number 5. The capital of China is, of course, Beijing, not Shanghai. Number 5 is false. China is in the Northern Hemisphere. Number 7 is true. The last emperor of China was actually only 2 years old, and he was known as Puyi. I think that's the correct pronunciation, but it's something perhaps I need to double check. Number 8 was true. The Chinese are attributed to inventing the toilet paper and fireworks that we know and love. Number 9, the Chinese flag is red with 10 small stars. That is false. It is definitely red, but there's only one large star and there are 4 smaller ones. And number 10 is true. Hong Kong was ruled by the British until 1997. Okay, so let's move on to the lesson today. Now today's lesson is going to be all about describing the distribution of population. Now, the distribution of population effectively means how is the population spread across the country? Are there areas where it clusters together? Are there lots of people living in certain places? Are there areas where the population is very spread out? Okay, so this lesson is all about getting to think about whereabouts people live across China. And then in the second half of the lesson, we're going to start thinking about the reasons for that pattern in terms of where people live. Okay, so to do this, you're going to be looking at 4 different maps. And your task will be to try and describe what you can see on each map. Okay. Now to do this effectively, you're going to try and follow this framework. So you first of all need to really think carefully, what is the map showing you? You also need to consider, is there a pattern to what's being shown? Is it even or uneven? Secondly, are there areas where there's a certain amount of clustering? So are you noticing it in clumps, whatever the map's showing? Or is there perhaps a pattern? So whereby you're seeing things following a line, which would be a linear pattern. Can you describe where this pattern is occurring? Can you talk about areas according to compass directions? Is it happening in the north or the south or the east of the country? Can you perhaps add any figures to illustrate what you're saying? Okay. Now you might be thinking that's a little bit confusing what I'm asking you to do there, but I'm going to show you the maps and also the sheet that you can use to fill in as you're working through it. And then you can reference back to this slide so that you can see exactly what you need to include in your description. Now there's some key terms that might help you as well. So the word sparsely means there's not very much there, it's very few. Densely means things are very crowded. And also clustered means there's kind of lots going in one area but not going on in another area. And linear, like we said earlier, is when a pattern is following a specific line, and that line could be curved or it could be straight. Okay, so you're going to try and fill in a grid that looks something like this, and this will help you to try and focus on your description. So when you get to map 1, you can fill in at the top what it actually shows. So perhaps look at the title, and then you're going to describe what you can see on that map. So again, can you see clustering of whatever's being shown on that map? Is it following a linear pattern? Are we seeing it happening in certain areas, perhaps in the north or the south or the east? Or can you use place names to add to your description? Are there any figures that you can use? Is there anything that doesn't fit with what your overall pattern is? Okay, so again, I would suggest you perhaps pause it on this screen if you want to make a copy of that grid. Okay, so here are the maps that you're going to be looking at. So this is map 1, and it's showing the relief across China. Now relief is to do with the height and the shape of the land. So the areas that are dark brown are the areas where the land is particularly high. And the areas that are green are the land that's basically flatter and closer to sea level. So with this map, you are describing the relief, and you are trying to describe which areas of the country are seeing high land, which areas of the country are showing areas of flatter land. Okay, so that will be map 1. Map 2, this one's showing your annual rainfall. So this time you need to look carefully at the key, because you're able to use figures here to tell you which areas of the country have the highest rainfall and which areas of the country have the lowest. And you can also be quite specific because you can refer to the different provinces that are labelled on the map as well. And if you haven't noticed already, there is a north arrow on there to help you with your compass directions. So that's map 2. Map 3. This one is showing you where farming takes place, and it's using this word cultivation, and cultivation is basically telling you which parts of the country are being farmed, and it's actually showing you it in various kind of levels of agriculture. So some areas you've got about 30% of the land being farmed. In other areas it may be very, very little, between 0 and 10% of the land. If you look carefully as well, you'll be able to see exactly what they're growing. So again, that can give you something to write about in your description. Okay. And then the final map you're going to look at in detail is this one that's actually showing you whereabouts in the country people tend to live. And again, you've got the provinces labelled, so you can refer to specific places. You've got the compass directions there. You've got actual numbers that link to the different colours on the map. So you can actually talk about which areas look quite sparsely populated and which areas seem to be quite densely populated. Okay, so take a few minutes to have a look through each of those 4 maps again and have a go at filling in, I'll just go back to it for you, at filling in your own version of this grid. Okay, pause the video there and have a go. Okay, so hopefully you've had opportunity now to look at all 4 maps. And the map I'd like us to focus in on is this one that you can see on the screen at the moment. And this is map 4, and it's showing us the population distribution across China. Now I'd like you to look really carefully at your description, and I'd like you to take some time to try and improve it. And I'm going to give you some criteria to help you. So have a look at this slide now. What did you actually write in your description? And perhaps you could look at these bullet points to see if you can improve it. Have you started with a brief sentence that outlines the pattern of population distribution? Have you said which areas are densely populated, named the regions, and use your compass points? Have you actually given the data? So in other words, have you used evidence to show how high the population is there? Equally, have you also said which areas are sparsely populated? In other words, have very few people living in there? Again, have you used evidence to back up what you've said? And lastly, is there anything that doesn't fit that overall pattern? So if you've said that most of the areas that are inland are sparsely populated, is that always the case? So take a moment to see if you can improve your description and pause the video while you do that. Okay, now that we've got a description of where the population is, we're going to use the other maps to help us explain why the population is found in certain areas and not so much in others. So, in order to do that, you need to look at your other three maps. You need to look at the height and the shape of the land. You need to consider the water supply, in other words, the rainfall, and you need to think about the agriculture, because each of those will influence where the population is found. So if you're making the point, for instance, that there are a lot of people living along the coast or in the east of the country, I want you to consider, well, what is the east of the country like in terms of the height of the land? What is the country like in terms of the amount of rainfall that you find there? What is the country like in terms of the agriculture that takes place there? And therefore, does that explain why people are mostly found in that area, but not in others? Okay, so have a look at your maps to help you do this. I've put some sentence starters on there as well that might help you with your structure. So pause the video now, look at all your maps, look at the grid that you've completed, and see if you can explain why people live in certain areas across China. Okay. And the final activity that I'd like you to do. We've only really considered three factors to try and explain the population distribution. We've talked about rainfall, perhaps being a reason why it's in the east of the country. We've talked about the flat land, and we've said also about the agriculture. What I'd like you to think about is whether there are perhaps other reasons why so many people live in the east of China, particularly along the coast. So you might want to discuss this with your partner. So pause the video now and see if you can think of any other reasons. So I hope you've had a chance to go through that with your partner, and I wonder if you came up with this answer. One of the main reasons there are so many people along the coast of China is because of trade. Effectively, if you are able to transport goods in and out of the country via the coast, it's much cheaper to do that. And so because of the imports and exports, there's a whole variety of jobs available along the coast. And China has become particularly important around the world, and it's known as the workshop of the world. It's really focused on developing its manufacturing industry, which is exported everywhere. Now, we will be coming back to that in a later lesson, but for now, we're going to leave it there. Thanks for listening.